the fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
This whole thing is a sad episode for the country, but like we said in the hearing today, 4 facts will never change. The transcript speaks for itself. There was no conditionality, no quid pro quo in the transcript. The 2 guys on the call have both been very clear. No pressure, no pushing, no linkage to investigations in both President Zelensky and President Trump have said. And of course, President Zelensky didn't pledge to do any investigations prior to the aid being released. And the Ukrainians didn't know that the aid was even on hold at the time of the call.
Ready for the debunk, everybody? Hello, how are you? I just can't even tell you what a potpourri of debunkification that testimony was yesterday. It was powerful, it was serious, it was unbelievable. Jim Jordan is lying. The President of the United States is lying. There's a Roger Stone trial going on over there. Roger Stone is lying. Paul Manafort lied to Mueller. So did Rick Gates lie to Mueller. So did Jared Kushner. So did Roger Stone himself. I mean, it's all congealing, if you will, if you must, into a giant, like necrotic gravy sore. Okay, the nurses are giggling. If you're not a nurse, it's just disgusting, okay? It's just disgusting. They're just picking out a scab until it dies. And so let's debunk, okay? Jim Jordan says there that Ukraine, let's start with the last one first, okay? That Ukraine did not even know that the aid was being withheld. Let's see if that's true.
Ukraine finds out about the hold.
Oh.
You're not able to give them a reason for the hold. No one is able to give them a reason for the hold. They know the president wants these investigations. And then they're told in Warsaw by Ambassador Sondland, essentially, you're not getting the aid unless you do these investigations, correct?
That's correct.
Oh.
So, you've been asked, how could there be conditioning if the Ukrainians didn't know? But the Ukrainians were told by Ambassador Sondland, were they not?
They were.
This is child's play, everybody. I mean, the president is a moron, and everybody that surrounds him, you would think that their lives depended on, Well, let's just see. Is there any other evidence that the Ukrainians knew?
Ambassador Sondland also told me that he now recognized that he had made a mistake by earlier telling Ukrainian officials that only a White House meeting with President Zelensky was dependent on a public announcement of the investigation. Oh! In fact, Ambassador Sondland said everything was dependent on such an announcement, including security assistance.
Oh, my God.
He said that President Trump wanted President Zelensky in a public box by making a public statement about ordering such investigations. In the same September 1st call, I told Ambassador Sondland that President Trump should have more respect for another head of state, and that what he described was not in the interest of either President Trump or President Zelensky. At that point, I asked Ambassador Sondland to push back on President Trump's demand. Ambassador Sondland pledged to try. I suggested the possibility that Ukrainian Prosecutor General, rather than President Zelensky, would make a statement about the investigations, potentially in coordination with Attorney General Barr's probe into the investigation of interference in the 2016 elections. The next day, September 2nd, Mr. Morrison called to inform me that Mr. Daniluk had asked him to come to his hotel in Warsaw. Mr. Daniluk expressed President Zelensky's concern about the possible loss of U.S. support for Ukraine. Mm-hmm. In particular, Mr. Morrison relayed to me that the inability of any U.S. officials to respond to the Ukrainians' explicit questions about security assistance was troubling them. Oh. I was experiencing the same tension in my dealings with the Ukrainians, including a meeting I had had with the defense minister that day. On September 5th, I accompanied Senators Johnson and Murphy during their visit to Kyiv. When we met with President Zelensky, his first question to the senators was about the withheld security assistance.
So you see you see how easy this is? All right, so not only did Ukraine know, so that's a lie, but Ukraine was freaked out, didn't want to make a public announcement about it because they were afraid that Russia was watching, Russia was listening, and they would lose their leverage in a negotiation with Russia to get the hell out of their country. Any other evidence that Jim Jordan just slept through yesterday? Any other? Was Ukraine ready to do anything? Were they booking themselves to make a public announcement on, I don't know, CNN?
Colleagues on the other side suggest that President Zelensky personally did not feel any pressure at any time. And yet later on in September, he finally relented in a conversation with Gordon Sondland, according to your deposition, in which he agreed to make a statement on CNN. Isn't that right?
But he didn't know.
He had planned to make a statement on CNN, yes, sir.
My colleagues also say that the hold on U.S. security assistance was lifted on September 11th without any investigations happening on the part of the Ukrainians, and therefore everything ended up fine in the end. However, Mr. Kent, as you know, the House Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, and Oversight Committees began this current investigation leading to the proceedings today on September 9th. In fact, it was only 2 days after this particular set of committees began their investigations that the Trump administration eventually released the military aid, correct?
That is a timeline, yes.
Fatality.
Oops. All right, let's go to one of the Republicans' other BS talking points. This was about rooting out corruption in Ukraine. We all know that corruption is rampant in Ukraine. So one of the, I can't remember if it was Bill Taylor or George Kent that said every country has corruption, including the United States. Okay, so that's that. But let's specifically focus on whether or not this particular effort that Trump was engaged in was a legitimate anti-corruption effort.
A lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that, so whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Mr. Kent, when you hear those words, do you hear the president participating in or requesting a thoughtful and well-calibrated anti-corruption program?
I do not.
And Mr. Kent and Mr. Taylor, the defenders of the president's behavior have made a big deal out of the fact that Vice President Biden encouraged the Ukrainians to remove a corrupt former Ukrainian prosecutor, 2016, Mr. Shokin. And in fact, Senator Rand Paul on Sunday said, and I quote him, "They're impeaching the President Trump for exactly the same thing that Joe Biden did." Is that correct? Is what the president did in his phone call and what Joe Biden did in terms of Mr. Shokin, are those exactly the same things? And if not, how are they different?
I do not think they are the same things. What former Vice President Biden requested of former President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, was the removal of a corrupt prosecutor general, Viktor Shokin, who had undermined a program of assistance that we had spent, again, U.S. taxpayer money, to try to build an independent investigator unit to go after corrupt prosecutors. And there was a case called the Diamond Prosecutor case in which Shokin destroyed the entire ecosystem that we were trying to help create. The investigators, the judges who issued the warrants, the law enforcement that had warrants to do the wiretapping, everybody to protect his former driver whom he'd made a prosecutor. That's what Joe Biden was asking, remove the corrupt prosecutor.
So Joe Biden was participating in an open effort, established whole of government effort to address corruption in Ukraine.
That is correct.
Fatality.
Whoops. And then they were relying on the same corrupt prosecutors